Okay, can you see that it's recording?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ooh, okay. All right. Should we just get started?
Yep. Sounds
Okay.
good.
My name's Sion,
My name's Taylor.
My name's Joe.
and we had the Echinoderms for our biodiversity presentation. So some distinguishing characteristics of it, they're a type of invertebrate marine animal. They have a hard spiny covering or skin. Their sizes can range. Some of the smallest are less than an inch, and some of the largest can get up to 6.6 feet. There are multiple types of echinoderms, but they all have the following characteristics. They're all pentamerous, which means they all have 5 parts, and they have radial symmetry. They all have an internal skeleton, and they all have a water vascular system that's derived from their column, which is their central cavity. And some of the general appearances that you might recognize from them is that they look like stemmed flower-like sea lilies. They can look like worm-like and burrowing cucumbers. Some of them are heavily armored that look like starfish or sea urchins. And then some of the other types are star-shaped with their arms extending from their body, and they're often cylindrical. And then the colors can range all sorts of different colors. So the first type that I mentioned is the starfish. Starfish are actually not a type of fish. They have rays or arms that surround the disc, which is compared to brittle sea stars. This disc is indistinct, meaning that it's not obviously a disc, and you'll see with the brittle stars how it differs. You can notice that they're covered in spines and pedicellary. They have grooves here on the underside of the arms that have tube feet, and they're often sucker tipped, which sometimes helps them attach to different surfaces and also catch some of their prey. There are over 1,600 different species, and they're most commonly found in, well, they're not most commonly found, but the largest variety is in the Northern Pacific Ocean. And like I said, for sea stars, they can range from anywhere from 8 to 25 inches. However, some can be much smaller. When sea stars, if anything happens to them, if their arms break, they can regenerate. So if at any time their arms break off, they just grow a new one. To eat, they sometimes sweep food particles from their arms with these sucker feet. They use those to pull the food into their mouths. Sometimes they evert, meaning their stomach comes out, and they will swallow their prey whole that way. And then you can see the internal skeleton is made up of limy plates, and they can breathe through their skin structure. Sea stars are heterosexual, but they can reproduce asexually, similar to how they can regenerate their arms. And there are 3 types of sea stars. There's the Phanerozoic, Spinulosa, and Forcipullata. Next are brittle stars. So brittle stars are similar to sea stars, but you can tell they look a lot different. So brittle stars can be found at a lot greater depths. You can notice that they have really long, thin arms that are kind of shaped snake-like, and they have spiky edges. Here you can see they have a distinct disc, whereas the sea stars, the disc kind of blended in with the arms. So here their arms are attached to a disc-shaped body, and similar to the sea stars, their arms can also regenerate, but the arms can also create multiple branches. And these arms can be very, very long. These are also called serpent stars sometimes. And on the mouth of the underside of the body, they have 5 teeth, which helps them eat their prey. And the tube feet that they have on their arms are mainly used to sense light and odor. So they don't really see because they don't have eyes, so they sense light and odor. And to feed, they use their arms to anchor into the mud or sand, and that's how they kind of catch their prey. Because if they didn't, they'd just be floating around. And like you see, most of the time they're found clinging to rocks or seafloors, or cnidarians as well. So they typically don't really move a lot.
Oh, I just realized that was me. I'm sorry. I was still like waiting to hear, and then I was like, oh my gosh, that's me. Okay, so sea urchins. So sea urchins are actually going to be one of the most well-known echinoderms, and that's probably, I honestly have heard of these. I don't know if you guys had remembered, but I remember the SpongeBob episode, and that's how I heard of them. So I almost wonder if that's why a lot of people have heard of them, but just I had found that they are actually one of the most well-known. And so sea stars do have no recognizable face, or sea urchins, I'm sorry, have no recognizable face. I just realized I put sea stars. They do have long spines outside of the body, which are very similar to a porcupine. And they actually, sea urchins are known as the ocean's porcupine. So this helps identify the animals are going to be their long spines. And there are over 950 species of sea urchins. The most common ones are going to be the purple sea urchins and the green sea urchins. And these animals do inhabit every ocean and can be found at every depth zone. And so, like I just said, the most common species are going to be the purple and green sea urchins. And these ones are going to be found more at the shallow depth zones, closer to the ocean shore and everything. So that's why these are going to be the most common species. And if you see in this picture, this is actually one of the purple sea urchins. So although most sea urchins are harmless to humans, there are a few that are going to be a little bit dangerous due to their poisonous spines, and one of the most poisonous ones to humans is going to be the flower sea urchin.
So next is sea cucumbers. Sea cucumbers are another form of echinoderm, like sea urchins and starfish. There are 1,250 different types of sea cucumbers, and the majority of them are shaped like cucumbers, like the one on the left. And they are dwelling in all different levels of the ocean. Some live in deeper depths, some live in shallower depths, like the brown sandfish and the black teatfish, but all are floor dwelling. Sea cucumbers are, in a sense, the earthworms of the ocean's ecosystem. They eat small, minute animals, algae, and waste particles, and then they gather up these foods using small tubules on their feet. After the food is consumed, it is broken down for small bacteria to consume. Sea cucumbers in their larval stage or their egg stage tend to be food for most fish and are consumed by humans sometimes. Next is the feather stars. Feather stars are in the crinoid class of echinoderms. They lack stalks and instead have feathery appendages like the one pictured that are usually used for swimming. There are 550 different types of feather stars, from rosy feather stars that live near the coast of Portugal to the Oxycobanthus bennetti off the coast of Portugal, which are found to be often in the Bay of Bengal. Feather stars are also known to regenerate their limbs endlessly, like their cousin the starfish. They also are known to inhabit many places from the equator to both poles. Some are known to be toxic when they're eaten to deter predators. Through their life cycle, they shed their arms, and some species have as low as 5 arms, but some have as many as 200. For the evolutionary history of echinoderms, echinoderms most likely began to spring out during the Precambrian era, with most of their evolution starting in the Cambrian era. It was also thought that these echinoderms had didn't have calcite skeletons and only had water vascular systems, which adds to the lack of fossils found in the Precambrian era. There are mass amounts of different body types inside of echinoderm species, and many who were experimenting with their different body size and shapes were short-lived. Early echinoderms lacked symmetry or were bilaterally symmetric, and the bilateral symmetry was most likely found in their larval stages. Early echinoderms, like the extinct sea lily, had 20-meter stalks, while echinoderms, like the ones today, might only get up to 1 meter, which is still pretty big, but it's small compared to the ones that were in the early oceans.
All right, so echinoderms are actually very important to the ecosystem as they play many ecological roles. So there are over 7,000 species of echinoderms, and each one is going to have a very important, and some are kind of different as well, important significance to the ecosystem. So echinoderms are a staple diet for many animals such as the sea otter. And then on the other hand, where's this at? They do eat seaweed. They're going to be kind of grazers, so they're going to eat seaweed or algae. So, for example, sea urchins are going to control the algae population because they feed on the algae. And then sea stars are going to be carnivores that feed on populations like clams and corals. Where's this at? So many echinoderms, such as sand dollars and sea cucumbers, burrow into the sand in the ocean floor, and this helps organisms live there as this provides more oxygen at greater depths of the seafloor. And then, so sea cucumbers help provide a habitat for parasites such as crabs, worms, and snails, which helps them live more. And then I kind of skipped around, but like I said on this last point, most echinoderms eat seaweeds, but there is a little bit of a difference where sea urchins will feed on algae, and then some sea stars are carnivores as they feed on things like clams and corals. And then so some topics of interest regarding echinoderms. So food-wise, there are some countries where echinoderms are considered delicacies. So for example, sea urchins are going to be consumed in Japan, Peru, Spain, and France. So in China, sea cucumbers are often based and used as a basis for soups and stews. And then if you see in this picture, this is actually going to be a sea urchin that is about to be ate. And then, so echinoderms can be used as a source of limestone. As a source of lime by farmers in areas where limestone is unavailable. And then if we look in this picture, more on the right, this shows that echinoderms can be used for medicine and scientific research. So an example of this is researchers found that sea cucumber toxins can slow down the growth rate of tumor cells. So there's interest in using these in cancer research, which I think is really interesting. And then also, I know Cian had said earlier that sea stars can regenerate missing limbs, but there's also a few other echinoderms, such as sea cucumbers. They can actually regenerate their intestines, but some brittle stars and sea stars can reproduce asexually by breaking a ray or arm or by deliberately splitting the body in half. Each half then becomes a whole new animal. So that's something that I found really interesting that I wanted to include in here.
All right, that is it.
All right.
Okay.
Sounds good. I definitely think that was more than 9 minutes, right?